Harley-Davidsons are slow. You're not a real biker if you ride a scooter. Ducatis are unreliable. Jigsaw riders are squids. Loud pipes save lives. We've all heard hundreds of unpopular opinions that circulate the motorcycle world, and whether they are true or not is entirely up to you. But today, I wanted to share some of my unpopular opinions, justify my position, and then you tell me whether you agree or not down in the comments. It's pretty normal to think long and hard about a topic when you're passionate about it, but I often keep my thoughts to myself because I don't want people to take it the wrong way. Apparently, a lot of people agreed with my thoughts on the Yamaha R7 being a brilliant bike, but is named terribly. And just about nobody agreed that BMW ruined superbikes forever. Then again, not many people stayed long enough to hear my reasoning. Nevertheless, today I'm going to double down and share more of my unpopular opinions that I find interesting to think about. Like, it might be time to kill the Hayabusa. Everybody knows the infamous Suzuki Hayabusa. It was launched back in 1999. At the time, manufacturers were fighting to have the fastest bike in the world, and the Hayabusa completely changed the game with its 1300cc inline 4. They're massive bikes, they're pretty wide, very aerodynamic, and completely built just to be fast in a straight line. Take one around the track, and it's pretty useless. Now, I will admit that I've never been a huge fan of the Hayabusa. I absolutely respect it because of what it did for motorcycling, but I was born just 1 year before this was announced. So to me, it's never been a huge deal. Personally, I've never been that impressed by straight line speed. I'm not that interested in drag racing. I'd much rather watch MotoGP where they're competing on a track. That's just much more entertaining to me. But 20 odd years later, things have changed quite a lot. The Hayabusa doesn't stand out as much as it did back in the 2000s. A modern superbike makes more power and is arguably faster than a Hayabusa in just about all areas. The Hayabusa was just recently updated in 2021, but it didn't actually make a leap. In fact, from what I found, it actually lost about 7 horsepower. Now, all of that can be blamed on new Euro 17 emission laws. They just get worse every single year. But I think at this point, Suzuki is just keeping the Hayabusa around because it's a legend and because they don't have much going on at the moment. If we compare a 2023 BMW S1000RR to a 2023 Hayabusa, the BMW comes out on top despite having 300 cc's less. The BMW is lighter. It actually makes more horsepower. And both bikes have the same top speed, but primarily due to speed limiters and the gentleman's agreement. The Hayabusa could do more if you de-restrict it. The only place the Hayabusa comes out on top effortlessly is its torque numbers, and that's just due to its large displacement, which is the only area I can still justify a Hayabusa. If Suzuki had continued to innovate the Hayabusa, like all other manufacturers have continued to innovate superbikes, think of how fast it could be. The reason modern superbikes can make more horsepower than a 1300 in a Hayabusa is simply because of how far engine materials have come. They're lighter, can rev higher, and all of that amounts to horsepower. But the main argument to keep the Hayabusa around is because there's no replacement for displacement. I think this is the only reason that people still love Hayabusas. Because if you do put lots of money into that engine, forged internals, say a turbocharger, it'll obviously make ridiculous power. And then they're still perfect for top speed runs and drag racing. So don't get me wrong, that side of things still completely interests me. I'd love to build a Hayabusa motor because that's all they're good for these days. But how many people will go and buy a brand new Hayabusa and build the engine? If you're comparing apples to apples from the factory, a modern superbike is a far better motorcycle in my opinion. This was probably a lot more controversial 20 years ago when two-strokes were far more prevalent, and a lot more controversial currently in the dirt bike scene as opposed to the street bike scene. But it is a dilemma I argue with myself constantly. At heart, I would love to be a two-stroke enthusiast and have one of those stickers that say 4-stroke sucks. But in reality, I absolutely love the convenience, practicality, reliability, and everything that goes with a 4-stroke. You see, 2-strokes are awesome. They're light, they're cheap, they're simple, and they sound amazing. But they also require a lot of TLC. I mean, they're always dripping some sort of oil. Manufacturers have also spent the last few decades innovating 4-strokes and neglecting 2-strokes. Besides maybe KTM, who now have their TBI 2-strokes, which is basically a fuel and oil injected 2-stroke. That was the innovation we needed probably 20 years ago. 4-strokes also offer more traction. Because there's only an explosion every second time the piston goes up and down, your tire has more time to relax and hook up. Engine braking also makes stopping a lot easier, and 4-strokes are just generally smoother and they have a broader power band, which makes most people faster on them. From my experience, if you can ride a 2-stroke fast, you can ride just about anything fast, but it doesn't work the opposite way around. And considering I can't even ride a 4-stroke fast, I don't have much hope. Now, I'm not here to argue about the stopping distance difference between ABS and no ABS. Because let's be honest, it's pretty easy to manipulate a test between the two and you can make your preference look better either way. For less experienced riders, ABS is by far the safer option because in an emergency situation, their instinct will probably be just to pull the brake levers as hard as possible. I am, however, here to argue that rudimentary ABS systems are more dangerous than no ABS at all, especially for experienced riders. For example, the ABS system here on my MT-09 is very basic. Well, at least that's how it always feels to me, because every time it activates, the lever starts pulsing underneath my foot, which gives me a fright, forcing me or causing me to just remove my foot completely from the brake. Now, that is far more dangerous than just the back wheel locking up in my opinion. To be fair, the ABS is doing its job correctly. I just think that it could do it a bit more discreetly so that it doesn't pulse under my foot quite that hard. It's entirely how I react to it as opposed to it doing it wrong. But more discretion would be nice. The feeling reminds me of scraping my foot on the ground, which is ridiculous considering I'm usually upright when it activates. And you would think I would get used to it, but even after over a year of riding this bike, it still gives me a fright every single time, as opposed to a back wheel locking up, which feels far more normal. And obviously, removing your foot completely from the brake lever will increase your stopping distance even more than not having ABS altogether. Now, newer bikes will probably be better and they will continue to only get better, but this is just dangerous. How many times have you seen a middle-aged man riding something similar to an R1250 GS, a big adventure bike, with all his panniers on the bike, his top box, and probably some reflective gear, while just grabbing some groceries at the grocery store? Now, I completely get it. All of those big adventure bikes are beautiful machines, and I would love to have one in my workshop too. They're probably the most universal bike you can buy, which is why all of these guys are buying them. You can do some touring, grab your groceries, and even do some gentle off-roading. Well, actually, a select few number of guys can ride them like they're practically a trials bike, but us regular guys can comfortably take them down a dirt road. But most 1250 GSs have never even seen a dirt road because their owners don't want to get them dusty. If you're lucky, the owner has toured thousands of miles with them. But the problem, at least to me, is that if you wanted an adventure bike, a big 1200 isn't the right bike. Something smaller like Yamaha's T7 or KTM's 890 Adventure will be far more competent off-road and a lot more fun for the rider. And the truth is that far better tourers exist too, like BMW's R1250 RT or the Honda Goldwing. So do these guys think that tourers are for old people or what? Okay, this one definitely needs some clarification because we all know that Ducatis are fast, fancy, and expensive. So you would assume that only enthusiasts would be willing to put their money into a Ducati. But that's not true. Now, there are exceptions to every rule, but for the most part, there are only two types of people who are buying Ducati V4 Panigales or V4 Street Fighters. The first one is the guy that I just explained, the sort of older gentleman who's accumulated some wealth, he's pretty experienced and passionate about motorcycles, and he's decided to put a lot of money into a Ducati because he appreciates the approach Ducati are taking with motorcycles and wants to experience it for himself. The other type of person who's buying one of these Ducatis is a brand new rider who has way too much money. To them, Ducati is seen as the Ferrari of motorcycles, and they're often surprised by how cheap a super bike is when you consider how expensive a super car is. If you have any experience with motorcycles, you'd firstly buy something that's better to learn on, and secondly, buy something that's better value for money, especially if you're just starting out. It's the same with a Ferrari. A lot of people who buy them are just looking for ways to spend their money, and they know that Ferrari is synonymous with luxury supercars. Only a select few buy Ferraris because they're super passionate about the brand and genuinely believe that the Ferrari is better than all your other options. I mean, a Porsche is obviously a better choice. Chances are your head already knows that this is true, but it's your heart that doesn't want to believe it. Something like a KTM 390 Duke has a top speed of 167 kilometers per hour, which means you can break the speed limit just about everywhere other than the Autobahn. It can also do 0 to 100 km an hour or 60 miles an hour in under 5 seconds, which might sound slow in the world of motorcycles, but that'll beat about 90% of cars on the road. They're also a lot of fun to ride because they're so light, which makes them incredibly nimble. So they're fun in the corners, they're fast enough to beat speed limits and stay ahead of cars, but your heart still wants the fastest bike you can possibly get. That's why we ride things like this and tell people that we never break the speed limit. But anyway, let me know if you agree with any of my unpopular opinions, or if you think there's a piece of information that'll change my mind. And now, I want to hear your unpopular opinions. So let me know down in the comments, and I'll see you on the next ride.